Impressioned consciousness. At the request of the editors, Meher Baba added the following information. Consciousness is definitely complete as soon as the first human form is taken, but it does not start involving at that point. When consciousness first begins to involve, it means that the human being is only beginning to take the first step on the spiritual path. Between the time of the first human incarnation and the time of going on the path, the complete consciousness of a human being, which is still an impressioned consciousness, has necessarily to indulge in a process that eventually must dislodge these impressions from retaining their hold on it. That is the consciousness which is complete. It is to be noted that during that period, which covers thousands of reincarnations, the impressions which were hard set or dense get shaken up so thoroughly by the reincarnation process. I'll just change the view because I think we were doing a better view.
A little bit bigger font is better.
Yeah, that's what we were doing, so I'll get to that. Yeah, this is what we were usually doing. So I'll start here again. It is to be noted that during that period, which covers thousands of reincarnations, the impressions which were hard set or dense get shaken up so thoroughly by the reincarnation process that their tight grip on consciousness becomes loose. These hard set, that is the dense or gross impressions, thin out or become feeble through innumerable and varied experiences of opposites. The limit to these experiences is reached by persistent reincarnations which give experiences of opposites. It is also to be noted that it is only when these dense, hard set, or gross impressions become less dense or become feeble that the limit to the experiences of the gross world through gross impressions is reached by the gross medium, which is the human body. When the dense, hard-set impressions becomes less dense, they no longer give rise to gross experiences because these less dense, the feeble impressions are refined or fine and no longer crude or gross. The aggregate of such refined or fine impressions is called subtle impressions. These subtle impressions give rise to impressions of the subtle type, that is pertaining to the subtle world. And the subtle body experiences these subtle impressions and tries to exhaust them. When these subtle impressions become even less dense and still more refined, the aggregate of such impressions is called mental impressions. These mental impressions give rise to experiences pertaining to the mental world, and the mental body experiences these mental impressions and tries to exhaust them. When the last traces of mental impressions are exhausted through experiences by the mental body, the complete consciousness of the soul, which was all along in the grip of impressions from the instant it identified itself with the most first human form up to the last human form, which is the mental conscious human being, is unburdened of impressions. Only such impressionless, complete consciousness of the I am God state of the soul. When the gross or hard set impressions get thinned out by the reincarnation process, they become subtle impressions. These subtle impressions can no longer give rise to the experiences of the gross world. At this stage, the consciousness of the gross conscious human being automatically begins to indulge in experiences of the subtle world. This marks the advent of the process of involution of consciousness, and the aspirant begins to tread the path. It is obvious that the subtle impressions must give rise to the subtle experiences of the subtle world. These subtle impressions get exhausted by the subtle body through experiences of the subtle world, and the process of involution of consciousness continues. This is from page 41, which is the reference to practical mysticism. Approach to truth is individual. There is no general rule or method applicable to all who aspire to realize God. Every man must work out his own salvation and must choose his own method, although his choice is mostly determined by the total effect of the mind impressions, samskaras, acquired in previous lives. He should be guided by the creed of his conscience and follow the method that best suits his spiritual tendency, his physical aptitude, and his external circumstances. Truth is one, but the approach to it is essentially individual. The Sufis say there are as many ways to God as there are souls of men. Al-Buruku il-Ilahi Khanufusi Bani Adam. Jamal-e Fivrat ke lakh partao, Kubul partao ki lakh shakij, Tariqi Irfaj Maij Kiya Batauj, Yah Rah Kiski, Wah Rah Kiski. Nature's beauty has thousands of facets for which there are thousands of ways and means of acceptance, that is understanding. In the path of gnosis, who can determine which particular mode or move is earmarked for a given individual? Then the topic moves to renunciation. And by pilgrim, we mean here aspirant or disciple feels drawn to renunciation. It means that the spirit of renunciation was already latent in him. This readiness results from the swinging of the terrible pendulum from pain to pleasure. One second. I had to switch on something. From pain to pleasure and pleasure to pain in the countless forms of evolution and in the countless entrances and exits through the doors of birth and death experienced through reincarnation. Because the spirit of renunciation is latent, it needs only some exciting cause to bring it to the surface, and it is only when it comes to the surface that we are able to see the power and nature of the latent spirit. If the latent spirit is simply a spiritual indigestion from a temporary surfeit of pain, combined with a mild desire for something more pleasant, the overt renunciation will be only of a fleeting and feeble kind, a mere temporary escape from unpleasantness. At its best, however, this latent spirit is a secret pact of aggression between an incurable disgust for the world and an ardent and burning thirst for God. When it comes to the surface, it shows itself as an invincible determination to marshal the entire being to the attainment of victory over the lower self and to reject everything that is irrelevant to this great and terrible struggle. Note this word reject. It means that such a pilgrim casts aside irrelevancies. We might call renunciation the fruit of the flower of spiritual longing, fertilized by the pollen of disgust for the futility of endless births and deaths. Once renunciation expresses itself, there are many ways of looking at it, of which the simplest is to divide it into two main types, internal and external. External renunciation means giving up completely all worldly delights and physical attachments to material things. In the early stages, this renunciation is helpful to the extent to which it leads to internal renunciation and preoccupation with God. Tens of thousands of so-called sannyasis, renunciators, are to be found in India, of whom far too many have adopted this external renunciation only as a profession that enables them to indulge in an unproductive life of idleness. External renunciation, however, can be and often is real. When this is so, it will inevitably lead on to internal renunciation. And this is the renunciation that matters. Internal renunciation means the control of desires at their very source so that the mind does not fall a prey to the demands of lust, greed, and anger. This does not mean that one shall not cease at once to have such thoughts. This is impossible, as such thoughts will continue to be troublesome as long as the samskaras from which they arise are part of one's being. The fight is necessarily hard and long. For the West in particular, external renunciation is inadvisable and impracticable. It should be internal and of the mind from the start. One should live in the world, perform all legitimate duties, and yet feel mentally detached from everything. One should be in the world, but not of it. The Sufis say, Dil bayar, dast bikar. The heart with God, the hands for work. Hazrat Nizamuddin Alia, the perfect master of Delhi, was once asked by a visitor how one should live in the world. At that moment, it so happened that a few women were passing by with pitchers of water balanced on their heads, and as they walked, they gossiped and gesticulated. Pointing to them, Nizamuddin said, Look at those women. That's how you should live in the world. Asked to explain this cryptic remark, the master continued, These women, returning from the well with pitchers balanced on their heads, seem to be thinking of nothing else but exchanging tidbits of gossip with each other. And yet, they are all the time concentrating on something far more important, on balancing the pitchers on their heads. Thus, whatever your body, your senses, or the purely surface part of your mind may be occupied with, see that the root of your mind is constantly focused on God. I'll take a pause. So interesting take. I really liked this distinction between external and internal. And more importantly, I liked what he said, the words he used initially. If the latent spirit is simply a spiritual indigestion from a temporary surfeit of pain, combined with a mild desire for something more pleasant, the overt renunciation will only be a fleeting and feeble kind, a mere temporary escape from unpleasantness. And I'm sure all of us can relate to this, right? So in our journeys, the initial things are just like that, right? So it's an identification which is temporary and fleeting. I mean, remarkable. So with that, I'll go to the next topic.
Yeah,
Vaitag.
I want to make a comment.
Sure.
That analogy that was given about the
Women.
ladies with pictures.
Yeah.
The analogy I have, when you see in Bombay and any other construction place, the laborers, when they are taking the stone or the mud or the bricks up the stairs, their babies lying on the floor, on the ground floor playing. But I always noticed that even though they are carrying all the, stuff up to the building for the construction, their eye is always on the baby. Just another analogy.
Yeah. Very true. Good. So I'll continue. Vaitag and Vairagya. If we look upon renunciation as being a state of mind, we can understand how the state of mind may be either temporary or permanent. The former is known as Vaitag and the latter as Vairagya. Vaitag is temporary renunciation. Am I pronouncing it right? I have not heard this word before. Vaitag or Vaitag? Anybody?
It's Voitag.
Vaitag. Okay.
Yeah.
Vaitag is simply a temporary disgust for the world and its affairs, resulting from some shock, disappointment, or loss, combined with a vague desire for God, or it may come from a sudden impulse. In Vaitag, the mind turns away from the world and takes to godly ways, but this attitude is not lasting, and the mind returns to its old ways as soon as circumstances alter or as soon as the impulse dies down. Vairagya, irrevocable renunciation, however, is an attitude of mind involving such a longing for God and such a deep indifference to things worldly that once roused, it knows no retreat and is proof against all temptations to give it up. The famous example of Gautama Buddha is illustrative of Vairagya. We have already explained that renunciation is the overt expression of a latent desire for union with God, combined with a latent spirit of disgust for the world, and we used an analogy of flower, pollen, and fruit. As far as fertilization is concerned, the flower and pollen by themselves are helpless, for the two can only be brought together by some outside agency, such as the wind, the bee, or the insect. Whether or not fertilization takes place in nature may depend upon so many thousands of unknown factors that modern science gives up trying to predict it and labels it chance. That, however, is beside the point at the moment, and in our analogy, we shall think of this fertilization as a gift. To return to Vairagya, let us remember that the longing for union with God is latent in every living being. However, it only pushes its way into consciousness when the soul approaches the beginning of what Meher Baba in the divine theme calls the realization process. The disgust for the world is also something that develops naturally in all of us and which grows more and more powerful as we draw nearer to the beginning of this realization process. When the flower is in full bloom and the pollen ripe, the wind or the bee gives the gift of fertilization that produces the fruit. In the same way, also, when this moment of inner readiness comes, a divine gift descends upon the soul, which fertilizes the longing for God and the disgust or indifference for the world, and so brings about the priceless fruit of Vairagya. This divine gift may be a touch of inner grace from the indwelling God, or it may be the result of contact with a saint or a perfect master, but it is always a gift. Vairagya, when it becomes manifest, will almost certainly express itself for a time as an external renunciation, but Vairagya being permanent will always lead sooner or later to the real renunciation, which is internal. When an aspirant has such an intense longing for truth, he is qualified to enter the path. There is a story of a master who was pestered by a disciple as to when he would realize God. Once, when they went to bathe in a river, the uh, uh, master held the aspirant underwater for a few moments. When the disciple was on the verge of suffocation, the master pulled him out and asked what he had thought of and longed for the most while underwater. The aspirant replied, air. The master explained that when the disciple had just as intense a longing for God, then realization would come. Maulana Rumi says, Ab kamju tishnigi avar bidast. Call out for water less, but create thirst for it more. In the words of Meher Baba, the path begins with a conscious longing for a deeper reality. As the fish which is taken out of water longs to go back to the water, so the aspirant who has sensed the goal longs to be united with God. In fact, the longing to go back to the source is present in each being from the very time that it gets separated from the source by the wheel of ignorance, but it's unconscious till the aspirant enters the path. The Sufis call this attitude of mind tawbah, meaning repentance, and implying the turning away from or renouncing of the life of the senses for the life of the spirit. One who has taken this great step does not look back again at which he has left behind. Meher Baba says that there may be 1,000 seekers enjoying as many spiritual experiences, but there is only one path of Gnosis. It is an internal but an actual pathway. Though not an ordinary path, it is distinctly perceptible as such to the internal eye of the true pilgrim who travels along it. But even those mystics who have truly experienced can only explain the sections of the path that they themselves have traversed. Those who have reached the critical point on the third plane can know nothing about the fourth plane, nor can they lead anyone up to their own level. Their knowledge and experience are limited to themselves. Only those on the fifth and sixth planes can bring others up to their own level, and anyone whom their grace descends will be greatly benefited. The individual souls of the world are within the limits of the gross sphere, which includes all the gross suns, moons, worlds, and all space. A savage, ignorant of the most elementary scientific laws and of the code of right and wrong, and a great philosopher or scientist are both within the bounds of the gross sphere. The philosopher may be quite familiar in theory with the subtle sphere, and the scientist may be an authority on the extreme frontiers of modern physics. But from the standpoint of the subtle, they are they and the savage belong to the gross sphere. Until the subtle sphere is experienced, Gnosis remains a subject for intellectual quibbling for all those belonging to the gross sphere, because by subtle we do not mean merely the finest form of the gross. In the ordinary sense of the word, it may be correct to call very fine substances such as ether, the atom, the vibration, light, and space subtle, but they are unquestionably gross, though in a very fine form. Spiritually speaking, subtle means something completely different from the physical. However, attenuated physical things may be. However attenuated physical things may be, although the gross sphere is the outcome of the subtle sphere and is dependent on it. The subtle sphere is completely independent of the gross sphere. As an example, we may take the act of eating. The gross act is the outcome of the thought and, and depends upon it, but the thought is independent of the physical act. Forgetfulness. The whole philosophy of approaching and realizing the truth hinges on the question of what we may call forgetfulness. The word forgetfulness used here must not be associated with its commonly accepted meaning of forgetting to post a letter or of a state of mind that is simply dull and blank. Forgetfulness, in this special sense, is an attitude of mind that develops gradually into spiritual experience. External renunciation is not forgetfulness because it is mostly physical and partly mental. But internal renunciation, when it becomes purely mental, does assume the quality and dignity of forgetfulness. Thus, one may renounce the world, but it is not so easy to forget it. Forgetfulness, in this special sense, thus explains the secret that lies behind all happiness, spiritual or otherwise, that human beings experience. The Sufi term for this forgetfulness is bikhudi, and it should not be mixed up, though it often is, with bihoshi, unconsciousness. The difference between forgetfulness and unconsciousness is important, and a few examples of types of unconsciousness will help to make it clear. To begin with, one must remember that forgetfulness is the partial or the total detachment of the mind from the physical world, and unconsciousness the partial or total deadening of the mind to the physical world. The former gives rise to various degrees of spiritual ecstasy, and the latter to various degrees of cessation of pleasure and pain. Let us then look at one or two examples of unconsciousness. In perfect health, one does not bother about the functioning of a vital organ like the heart. This means that one forgets that this organ is beating ceaselessly and perfectly in the human body for the maintenance of life and health. If, however, there is a disturbance in the cardiac rhythm, there is immediate discomfort, and if there is a cardiac infarct, there is immediate precordial pain. In either case, one is reminded that one has a heart. The sensation of discomfort or pain, though it arises from the heart, is felt only because of the functioning of the mind. The more the mind is directed to the heart, the more the discomfort or pain is felt. When the pain reaches its climax, unconsciousness may supervene, a break in the threads of consciousness that enables one to forget the pain. But this is unconsciousness and not forgetfulness in its spiritual sense. A surgeon, by performing a prefrontal leucotomy, can interfere with some of the nervous pathways that serve this focusing of the mind on the intractable pain of some incurable disease like cancer. After this operation, the pain is still there, but the patient ceases to direct his mind towards it and so ceases to bother about it. This again is a partial unconsciousness brought about by purely physical means and not true forgetfulness in its spiritual sense. Sleep is a state of unconsciousness that affords a temporary respite from the wear and tear of life. But sleep is not true forgetfulness in its spiritual sense. The whole philosophy of happiness and unhappiness, therefore, hinges on the question of forgetfulness of some kind or another, and of remembrance of some kind or another. Remembrance is an attachment of mind to a particular idea, person, thing, or place, and forgetfulness is its opposite. Once it is understood that remembrance causes pain, it follows that the only cure is some kind of forgetfulness, and this forgetfulness may be either positive or negative. The positive forgetfulness is one in which the mind remains aware of external stimuli but refuses to react to them. The negative forgetfulness is either mere unconsciousness, a stopping of the mind as in sound sleep, or an acceleration of it as in madness, which has been defined as a way of avoiding the memory of suffering. Either sleep or madness may be artificially induced in various degrees by the use of intoxicants or drugs, but this is also a negative way of overcoming remembrance. Positive forgetfulness, then, is the cure, and its steady cultivation develops in man that balance to express noble traits of charity, forgiveness, tolerance, selflessness, and service to others. One who is not equipped with this positive forgetfulness, barometer of surroundings, his poise is disturbed by the slightest whisper of praise or flattery, and by the faintest suggestion of slander or criticism. His mind is like a slender reed swayed by the lightest breeze of emotion. Such a man is perpetually at war with himself and knows no peace. In the exercise of this positive forgetfulness, not only is non reaction to adverse circumstances essential, but also non reaction to favorable and pleasurable circumstances. Of these two, the latter is the harder and is less often described, although it matters just as much. Positive forgetfulness, although it lies at the very root of happiness, is by no means easy to acquire. Once a man attains this state of mind, however, he rises above pain and pleasure. He is master of himself. This forgetfulness, to be fully effective for the spiritual life, must become permanent, and such permanence is only acquired through constant practice during many lives. Some people, as a result of efforts towards forgetfulness in past lives, get spontaneous and temporary flashes of it in a later life, and it is such give to the world the best in poetry, art, and philosophy, and who make the greatest discoveries in science. In such moments of true forgetfulness, there is a mental detachment from all material surroundings in which the poet allows his imagination to soar. An artist, when he gives form to an ideal in which he completely forgets himself and all irrelevant surroundings, creates a masterpiece. The best of philosophy is uttered when a man surveys the problem of life without reference to the ups and downs of his purely personal circumstances. And some of the greatest scientific discoveries have been made in the same frame of mind. Such manifestations of genuine spontaneity of forgetfulness are very rare indeed. And although it is said that poets, artists, and philosophers are born and not made, these fleeting phases of real forgetfulness are the result of efforts made in past lives. In an attempt to make life bearable, some people develop a feeble kind of stoicism, a anyway outlook, and others plunge recklessly into Epicureanism. The former is the apathetic acceptance of defeat and one second. Wow. Neither is true forgetfulness, but when a wait, I'll just read the last line. The former is the apathetic acceptance of defeat, and the latter, the effort to forget defeat in the arms of pleasure. Neither is true forgetfulness, but when a man acquires true forgetfulness, he enters the spiritual kingdom and passes through different degrees of forgetfulness until the goal is reached. Meher Baba tells us, forgetfulness of the world makes one a pilgrim, Rahrav Sadak. Forgetfulness of the next world makes one a saint. Forgetfulness of self means realization, and forgetfulness of forgetfulness is perfection. So with
Yeah,
that,
the word sadhak means seeker in English.
correct. Someone on the path. So with that, we are getting to the planes. Page 42, the first reference to the first plane. Hafiz evidently refers to the first plane when he says, Kas nadanist ki manzilaga e maksud kujast in kadar hast ki bangi jarasi miyat. Apologies for messing up all the Arabic because I don't understand this transliteration. Obviously, there is some transliteration that they have done. It is not known where the real abode of the divine beloved is. Only this much is clear, that I hear the sound of bells from the traveling caravans. On this subject of sound and the planes, Meher Baba says, however, know this, that sound exists through all the seven planes, differing in its expression of feeling, ecstasy, and bliss. The sound, sight, or smell of the higher planes can, with no stretch of the imagination, be likened to what we are used to on the physical plane. Our physical organs of hearing, seeing, and smelling are useless for experiencing and enjoying the higher planes. Therein, it is a different eye that sees, a different ear that hears, and a different nose that smells. You know already that there are inner senses, counterparts of the external senses in man, and it is with the former that one experiences the higher planes. Avoid the mistake.
Here he is talking of intuition rather than the intellect. Okay.
Correct.
It's all beyond the mind.
Correct. And you use inner aspects of the ear, eyes, and sense. Avoid
Yeah.
the mistake of likening the sound of the higher planes to something different in intensity and frequency of vibrations to the sound of the physical plane. Know it for a certainty that there is actually what may be called sound in the first three planes. The form, beauty, music, and bliss of this sound are beyond description. The nad or celestial music is peculiar to the first plane, which Hafiz refers to as Bangi Jarazi, the ringing of bells.
We also call this sound of silence.
Yeah,
Voice of silence or sound of silence.
sound of silence. As stated above, although there is sound in all the seven planes, it is smell that is peculiar to the second and third planes, while sight belongs to the fifth and sixth planes. The seventh plane stands unique. Here, the sound, sight, and smell are divine in essence and have no comparison to those emanating from the lower planes. In this plane, one does not hear, smell, or see, but one becomes sound, smell, and sight simultaneously and is divinely conscious of it. Wow. Second plane, referred to from page 43. Hafiz evidently refers to the second plane when he says, Siguyamat ki bimai khani dush mast o karab surushi e alam e gaibam si muzida dadast. How should I reveal to you that last night in the tavern, intoxicated and unsteady as I was, great good tidings were brought to me by the angel of the hidden world. So it's just a reference to a poem for the second play and the third play. Hafiz refers to the third plane in the following words. Chi ra mizanat in muvrid e mukam shinas ki dar miyan e ghazal kul e ashiyana abard. What perturbation and distress this musician with knowledge of spiritual states and stages is causing the listeners, lovers, by interpolating in the midst of his performance the words of the divine beloved. 6 is the stage between the third and the fourth planes. The journey between the third and the fourth planes is at once difficult and dangerous because between these two planes there is the point of enchantment, Mukam e Hayrat. It is very difficult to pass out of the state of enchantment if the pilgrim once stops there. Although most pilgrims pass directly from the third to the fourth plane. Unless the pilgrim gets out of this state quickly and proceeds onwards to the fourth plane, his progress will be held up indefinitely. Once a pilgrim becomes thus enchanted, he remains so for days, months, or years together. He can neither make further progress or nor can he retrogress. He is neither gross conscious nor subtle conscious. Neither can he be called unconscious because he is fully conscious of the enchantment, and it is because of his consciousness of the enchantment that he lives this living death. The physical condition of the deeply enchanted pilgrim is no less strange. For if he seats himself in a particular position, he remains in that position for months or years together. Similarly, if he becomes enchanted while standing, he will continue standing until the enchantment ends. In short, he remains stationary in the position in which he first becomes enchanted, and although he may appear to be a lifeless statue, he is in fact more alive than the ordinary man of the world. It is well known to the Sufi world how Ali Ahmed Sabir of Piran Kalyar, who afterwards became a perfect master, once remained standing for years near a certain tree. During this period, Sabir's mind was absorbed in the enchantment of this Mukam e Hayrat, and he was delivered from it by a kutub. Only natural death or divine help from a living master can help such a dazed pilgrim out of his spiritual stalemate. A master would help such a pilgrim either by bringing him back to the third plane or by pushing him onwards. Hafiz, no doubt, thinks of this stage of the pilgrim when he says, Mastam kun an kunan ki nadanam zi bi kudi dar asih kial ki amad kudam raft.
Let me come in here.
Sure.
This is very similar to people who get into spirituality and meditation and are tempted to do samadhi. Samadhi is very dangerous and it has the same state. No one can wake you up from that once you go into samadhi. No one except yourself.
Or a
So,
kutub.
yeah, here he says
Compassion from a perfect
Guru
master
can
who's been
help.
watching you.
Guru can help. Usually for beginners, meditations beyond 20 minutes are not recommended.
Cool. Meher Baba explains that a pilgrim runs the risk of entering Mukam-e-Hayrat when he passes from the third to the fourth plane. There are, he says, states of enchantment on other parts of the path also. But the most important is that between the third and the fourth planes, this Hayrat, enchantment, may be strong or feeble. If there is no hitch or disturbing factor present at the moment that a pilgrim becomes enchanted, then the Hayrat is deep or strong. If there is a disturbing factor present at that moment, then the Hayrat is feeble. If a pilgrim experiences either strong or feeble Hayrat between the third and the fourth planes and is then pushed forward by accident to a higher plane, he invariably goes to a position between the fifth and sixth planes, again with the same strong or feeble Hayrat. However, such instances are very rare. Ali Ahmad Sabir of Kalyar and Baba Abdul Rahman of Bombay both were precipitated from a very strong Hayrat between the third and fourth plane into a very strong Hayrat between the fifth and the sixth planes, the former by a gift of grace from a Kutub, and the latter through God's gift in the shape of an accident. A complete fixity of posture that lasts until death or until a perfect master is contacted is seen only in those pilgrims who have a very strong Hayrat. A must God intoxicated, who has been with Meher Baba for many years, was in this Mukam-e-Hayrat between the third and fourth planes when he was brought to Meher Baba in Rahuri in 1936. But his Hayrat was feeble, and although he would stand for many hours at a stretch in one position, this position would not be maintained permanently. The enchantment of Ali Ahmed Sabir, however, was a strong one, and he remained in one posture until he was finally delivered from the enchantment by a kutub. This state of enchantment should on no account be confused with a catatonic stupor of a schizophrenic, although it may appear similar. Both are states of enchantment, but they are poles apart. Pilgrim of the mental sphere, Meher Baba says that if a pilgrim of the mental sphere is in India and conceives the idea of seeing America, simultaneous with the wish on his part, either mentally or physically as he wishes, he will be there. One may ask how he travels as fast as though as thought itself. The answer is that the mind is everywhere, and therefore the pilgrim of the mental sphere does not have to travel. He can be anywhere he likes without using his gross or subtle organs. He can now he can know anything and everything about the gross, subtle, and mental spheres as far as the sixth plane simply by willing to know. More important still, he can help less advanced souls and also ordinary human beings to come up to his own level of progress. When he wants to help anyone directly, the pilgrim of the fifth plane can lead an aspirant by the hand along the path. When he does so, the aspirant himself also perceives internally the continual presence of the master of the mental plane, known to Sufis as a Bali, and also himself being actually led by him along the path to perfection. Hafiz, in the following couplet, evidently visualizes the particular sensation of one who is being led in this way. Tu dastagu shu I, kir ipai, kujasit, kujastihi, ki man, piyadi miravam, o hamrahan, savaranand. O august master, lead me by the hand because I am traversing the path on foot, helplessly as compared with other companions who are riding along it. Generally, however, a wali helps an aspirant by gazing into his eyes, thereby tearing away the inner veil from the real eye within. This spiritual influence of the wali through sight is known to Sufis as tawajjuh. The term tawajjuh does not apply to perfect masters. In their case, the term will is correct, for they can also render this help without the physical contact that is necessary in the case of masters of the planes. Meher Baba explains that on the fifth plane, the pilgrim sometimes desires to have the divine presence and sometimes attends to worldly duties. In fact, so far as divine presence on the fifth plane is concerned, God is always present, but the pilgrim may not always desire this presence when he turns his attention to worldly duties. On the sixth plane, the pilgrim persists in desiring the presence of God 100%. Hafiz evidently refers to this experience on the fifth plane when he says, Kuyuri gar hami kwalu azu gayid mashu Hafiz. O Hafiz, if you desire the divine presence, then do not allow yourself to be absent. The sixth plane, the traveler who succeeds in reaching this plane is entitled to be called a Pir or Satpurush. There is no adequate translation of these words in English. The word saint would perhaps do, but it suffers from the handicap of very loose usage. Hafiz remembers this sixth plane in the following words. Ma dar piyali aks e ruk yar didih im. I be kabar zi laksat e shurbi mudam ima. We have seen the face of the beloved reflected in the cup of your mind or heart. O ignorant one, no notion have you of the bliss that we imbibe therefrom. From there, gnosis of the sixth plane from page 51. Concerning the gnosis of the sixth plane, Meher Baba tells us only God exists, and if anything exists due to ignorance, its reality is illusory. It then exists as God's shadow, which means that God is both in the stage of knowledge and ignorance. The following four angles of the one experience written in the language of Sufi Gnosis are different aspects of Gnosis of souls in the sixth plane when they are face to face with God, but still in the domain of duality. All of these aspects are experienced together at the same time. Hama ust, this means everything is He. And for one who experiences this gnosis, only God exists. Hama ust. Hama az ust. This means everything is from Him. And for one who experiences this gnosis, all phenomena, diversities, and manyness exist as illusion when ignorance prevails. Hama ba ust. This means everything is with him. And for one who experiences this gnosis, God is both attributeless and with attributes. His attributes are unlimited when knowledge prevails and limited when ignorance prevails. Body, mind, and the three worlds do not exist. But if they seem to exist, they exist as shadows. Hama dar ust. This means everything is in him. And for one experiencing this gnosis, even ignorance has no reality in itself. Its existence, when expressed, comes out of knowledge of God's unconscious and infinite knowledge. And so, whatever exists in duality due to ignorance has come out of God where it everlastingly existed. With that, we'll do seventh plane. It should be understood that at the moment of being merged into the seventh plane, all links with the gross, subtle, and mental bodies and with the universe are necessarily snapped. In ordinary gross existence, there is no parallel to the snapping of these long enduring vital connections that bind the individual to his three bodies and to the universe. Physical death is by comparison an insignificant thing, about as significant as the snapping of a piece of string. Ordinarily, at the instant of death, the subtle body and the vital force are separated completely from the gross body. But the mind maintains the connection with the gross body for the first 4 days after death, and to a slighter degree for 7 days more after that. In the final annihilation, fana, however, the separation is not between body and mind. It is the actual annihilation of mind and all naksh e amal. Have we done 67? Let me check. So we are, yeah, we are yet to get to 67. Okay, so
Yes.
we can do that. So going forward, we'll do the footnotes in parallel. I mean, the supplementary notes referred to in the pages, we'll do it along with it. So we'll do 11 after a page that we have to complete. So with
11
that,
and 12.
correct. 11 and is it 12?
Yes.
11 and 12, yeah.
I will suggest you read that part from beams and the chapter on sanskara's formation and functioning.
Sure. Let's do that.
That says a footnote on the first few pages.
Beams the reference to the Whim, right?
Yeah, so that is just
4 pages, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can read right now.
That's what we finished that. That makes sense. So again, Jai Baba.
7 to 11.
Yeah, I think I'll download and deal with it. That's better. It's a very brief thing, but very useful. The Whim from the beyond. Through the ages, the human mind has been profoundly restless in its search for final explanation about first things. The history of these endeavors to grasp first things through the intellect is a tale of recurrent failures. The redeeming feature of these great efforts is that instead of being disheartened by the confessed failures of past thinkers, others are inspired to make fresh attempts. All these philosophical explanations are creations of the mind that has never succeeded in passing beyond itself. Thus, they are confessed through inspiring failures. Nonetheless, each such failure is a partial contribution to knowledge of the beyond. Only those who have gone beyond the mind know. The truth in its reality, only the I'll read that. Only those who have gone beyond the mind know the truth in its reality. If they sometimes explain what they know, which they rarely do, those explanations also being in words are limited, but these words illumine the mind. They do not fill it with novel ideas. The Unitarian beyond is an indivisible and indescribable infinity. It seeks to know itself. It is of no use to ask why it does so. To attempt to give a reason for this is to be involved in further questions and thus to start an unending chain of reasons for these reasons, and so on ad infinitum. The plain truth the plain truth about this initial urge to know itself is best called a whim. A whim is not a whim if it can be explained or rationalized. I'll repeat. A whim is not a whim if it can be explained or rationalized. And just as no one may usefully ask why it arises, so no one may ask when it arises. When implies a time series with past, present, and future. All these are absent in the eternal beyond. So let us call this initial urge to know a whim. You may call this an explanation if you like, or you may call it an affirmation of its inherent inexplicability. The initial whim is completely independent of reason, intellect, or imagination, all of which are byproducts of this whim. Reason, intellect, and imagination depend upon the initial whim and not vice versa, because the whim is not dependent upon reason, intellect, or imagination. It can neither be understood nor interpreted in terms of any of these faculties of the limited mind. The first whim to know instantaneously implies a duality, an apparent differentiation, not amounting to a breaking up, into two separate aspects, both of which are infinite as aspects of the infinite. The first aspect is that of infinite consciousness, and the second aspect is that of infinite unconsciousness. The duality strives to overcome itself and to restore the apparently lost unity. The infinite unconsciousness tries to unite with infinite consciousness. Both aspects are precipitated by the whim. This whim of the infinite is in a way comparable to an infinite question calling for an infinite answer. With the infinite question, there arises also the infinite answer. The infinite question is infinite unconsciousness. The infinite answer is infinite consciousness. But the infinite question and the infinite answer do not simply annul each other and relapse into the original unity of the beyond. The two aspects have now descended into the primal duality, which can resolve itself only by fulfilling the entire game of duality and not by any shortcut. The infinite unconsciousness cannot overlap on infinite consciousness. Such coalescence is impossible. To reach out towards infinite consciousness, the infinite unconsciousness first has to fathom its own depths. It must experience itself first as infinitely finite and gradually evolve into limited and limiting consciousness. with the evolution of the limited and limiting consciousness, there is also the evolution of the illusion, which limits this limiting consciousness. The two processes keep pace with each other. When the infinite unconsciousness tries to reach out to the infinite consciousness, the process is not instantaneous because of the infinite disparity between the two. The process takes an infinitely long time, and eternity gets seemingly broken into the unending past, the transient present, and the uncertain future. Instead of embracing the infinite consciousness in one act, the infinite unconsciousness reaches out towards it through a long drawn out temporal process of evolution with all of its innumerable steps. Its first attempts to fathom its own depths. Then, by backward treads, it seeks and ultimately finds the infinite consciousness through the numberless steps, thus fulfilling the whim from the beyond. I think this is a good time to read this again, though I referred it earlier. Thank you, Tushar. This again summarizes and gives us the overall broad canvas of what we're trying to comprehend. So I just love these 4 pages.
It's,
Great. So any other comments before we drop off?
I want
Yeah, go ahead, Mama, and then Kama.
so what I feel here is that when I was living in Almora in 2011, I met a gentleman who was an engineer, and I told him about it, and he said that this entity, which is supposed to be intelligent and beyond your
Your audio
God
is
is supposed
bad.
to. Why does God speak to know himself? What is this whim? And I thought that was a very intelligent
Kama, your
question.
audio is
I looked
bad.
it up.
We are barely able to
Hello?
comprehend the finite expressions coming from your infinite self. It is infinitely incomprehensible.
Hello, can you hear me?
no, Kama. Kama, you're not audible.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, barely. You have to
Yeah.
speak up or use a hands-free.
Yeah,
If you're
I
using
tried
the
to use the
tablet,
device.
if you're using the tablet, go closer to the mic because we're not able to hear you.
No, I'm using my smartphone.
Okay.
So
Keep it closer to your mouth. Now it is a little better.
yeah.
Repeat.
Yeah. What I was first said that if the whim to know why should an intelligent being like God has to know himself, and the answer came to me that he didn't want to know itself; it wanted to amuse itself. That is why it goes through this process of infinite unconscious and infinite consciousness. And I think God speaks has given an analogy. When the baby is born, it is actually unconscious of its gender. So the baby is basically amusing itself. It's playing. It doesn't care whether it wants to know itself. Only when we become an adult, we start having these questions. So that was my point. That this whole creation, this whole aspect of Big Bang and the whim is basically that we are all here to amuse ourselves. Nothing else. That's why the game of duality.
Correct.
That's it. Krishna Leela, game of duality, or get over duality in the waking state,
I feel we should have more interaction from Sunil and
Hi, Jai Baba Tushar.
yeah. Please go ahead.
Well, Tushar, I'll be honest, this is the first reading for us, for me at least, Nomita as well. So we are listening, we are absorbing, and we are enjoying the reading. So
Good.
pardon us if we are not participating too much, but you know, being the first reading of God Speaks, it's heavy, but it's very enlightening and it's very enjoyable. And I'm regretting why I didn't start this earlier, but there has to be a start, and you guys are our gurus now. Baba has kind of bestowed the responsibility on you all to teach us, so why not? We are here. Thank you so much.
And you can ask very silly questions. It's important that you be interactive because we have missed the silliness perhaps in the past for ourselves.
Right. I will try. I didn't print the book yet. I will try to print and read it in free time. And while you're reading, Karthik is reading, it's difficult to connect the dots here and there. But just the reading itself, there's a lot of things that sink in. So we are listening, enjoying, and trying to get into the rhythm. So thanks a lot for all that. But give me a little while more to ask questions. I will. Namita, you have anything to say?
Sure, sure.
You're on mute.
Namita, you're a bit audible.
Mama wanted to come in.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello.
you're
Go
audible now.
ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, Nomita, go ahead. Now we can hear you.
Yeah, so today was better for me because anecdotes and things that are connected to life sit better in my head than consciousness and not consciousness.
Let me reassure you, it was better for all of us. Okay,
So
not
I
just.
like today was, very helpful and nice for me. I always keep on questioning myself, all right, now this is fourth plane, fifth plane, sixth plane, seventh plane. What am I supposed to do? How do I get there? So if you have any shortcuts, please let us know.
Use the lift, but sanitize before you get in.
Don't worry, we are in perhaps plane one, all of us. Don't worry.
All of us.
I mean, I think I can get there quickly.
So we'll all go together up.
We'll be neighbors there as well.
Yeah.
Sure.
All along, all along.
Yeah, it's very nice. We are really enjoying ourselves. I read discourses on my page every night,
Good,
and
good.
so it's really connecting. And I don't just explain how much Baba knows and has given to the world is mind-boggling. How much he knows. And of course, he's God. He must know. But for us lesser mortals who don't really think that way, it's really just the scale. You just have to admit. My heart just says that it's beyond my understanding to know what steps. Am I going to create a cheat sheet for myself to get into those places? I think my way would be admission and just loving Baba. Whatever he puts in my head, goes.
So welcome to infinity.
Thank you. So nice to be in this group. Really, both Sunil and I are friends. And we are thinking very well this time because we have been, Baba has been in the family for many, many years. He came to us through Sunil's grandfather. And we were just singing bhajans and not going beyond that. So, yeah, very, very thankful to Neha for telling me about this.
Yes,
And
indeed.
so grateful to all of you. And Karthik reads so beautifully as if he is a pandit in all of this.
Very nice, yeah.
Baba is always there, but you'll have to make efforts towards your inner journey.
Yeah.
All right, Tushar, yeah.
What we've learned today in various pages.
Yes.
You'll have to make efforts. It's not going to become effortless to reach effortlessness. You have to put effort to reach effortlessness.
Let's see, maybe he has a cheat sheet for us.
No, the cheat sheet is what we are reading, so it's not an easy journey.
I think Mama wanted to come.
Yeah, he wanted to say something. Yeah.
No, as Tushar had told a few days back, I'm just reading. I'm not trying to analyze. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me do the other things later.
Sure. Yeah, so I think it's a gradual process of uncovering. So
Yes.
we will go through this again and again. But I enjoyed. Thanks, Kama, for the tip for going to the supplement, because I think this gave a lot more clarity, and it was appropriate that we catch up with the supplement as well.
I keep on wondering, how would he dictate these words? And who knew whether he's speaking in Gujarati or English? And how do you get these precise words? It's beyond my understanding.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how he has done that. It's not just
Yeah.
one book, right? So reading it and comprehending it is taking us so much time. And he has written, edited, re-edited, and
Right. Mm.
Amazing.
that's so we have to understand the word infinite to get that.
I'm very glad we are at least at the base camp.
Yes, we are.
So don't worry, we'll be doing it again and again.
Sure.
All right, Jai Baba.
All right,
Just
Jai
one
Baba.
question, Karthik.
Yeah.
The book, the PDF copy
Mhm.
I downloaded has it says God speaks underscore r dash dot PDF, and it has
There are two of
163
them.
pages. Oh, there are
Yeah,
two of them.
there are
Okay.
two of them.
Yeah.
The second one has the supplement.
All
Right.
right. Okay. I'll
It
get both.
ends with the name underscore R2, I think.
I see. Okay. I'll pull that out as well.
Yeah. So there are
Thank
two
you.
of them. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Have a good
Thank you,
day.
Okay.
Jai
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 Baba.
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 Yeah.
Jai Baba.
Thank you.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.